Hi, I'm Che Sherilyn Birchwood, PhD candidate in psychology with a specialization in clinical research and intervention. So I study in French, so that's the loose translation of my degree from French. I'll make this video again in French a little bit later. So I'm here doing a little bit of knowledge transfer / knowledge mobilization / knowledge exchange, as that is the field of my thesis research, and it's also a personal passion of mine. And within that field, it's essential to find ways to communicate research and develop practices that are both evidence-based and serve the target population. So as such, I wanted to do a little knowledge transfer by summarizing a vast body of research into a video that I hope is understandable. I'm not here representing any school, organization, or company. As I stated, I did not state what school I go to or anything like that. I'm just here doing a little bit of public service on my own personal time. Again, I'm not representing anyone but myself. No one told me to make this video. This is of my own volition. Okay. So in this video, I'll be talking about sex. Not sexual intercourse kind of sex, but biological sex, and a concept that is often related to it, which is gender. This video will be purely based on research, not on personal opinion. That is why I'm making a distinction between sex and gender, because that's how it is in the research literature, especially in psychology. There are sources in the comments below this video, which you can read for yourself. I highly encourage you to read the book Sex and Gender by Hilary Lips. That is kind of the foundation for this train of thought, and then I did more research, more recent research, and explored certain concepts more in depth. But the book, it's a textbook by Hilary Lips, will give a really nice foundation and a great summary of thousands of studies, or hundreds of studies at least. So I know reading textbooks isn't doable for most people though, so that's why I'm here making this video. But I still wanted to include the sources for transparency and depth. The concepts of sex and gender can be so vast and confusing, especially since, as you'll see, in popular opinion often contradicts the science. I hope this video can provide some clarity, reduce arguments and divisions, and provide a little bit of a larger perspective on something that we tend to reduce into something very small. Okay, let's get into it. First off, the concept of sex is not based on a singular trait. I'll use the word concept multiple times, and the reason why I'm using that is from a scientific statistical background. So in statistics and psychometrics, you have a concept, which is a large construct, and then within it there are several factors that make up that construct, and within the factor there can be several items that together create that factor, which then together create this construct. So that is the kind of terminology I'll be using, and that's how I'm going to divide these different sex traits. So there are at least 5 different factors that compose sex, biological sex. First is chromosomes. You'll often hear that social chromosomes, we have approximately 46 of them, but that can vary. It can vary from about 46 to 50. Some people have 45. It really depends. It's not purely individual, but there's a lot of variation to it. What I'll be referring to when I talk about chromosomes here are our sex chromosomes, which are our last set of chromosomes. And what we'll often hear is that, even I just said it, it's our last pair, but that's not the case. It's not like universally the case. So what you hear often is that humans either have XX chromosomes or XY chromosomes, that it's a binary, but that is untrue. In fact, there are 7 chromosomal categories, sex chromosomal categories in humans, at least 7. There's 7 that we know of right now. okay, which is XX, XY, XXY, XYY, XXYY, XXXY, and XYYY. So already this thing that we kind of know or think we know to be two, to be binary, is actually at least 7 different items, 7 different categories. And very few of us know our exact sex chromosomes, though we tend to make assumptions based on morphology, which is unwise. As I just said, there's all this other stuff that most of us don't know. Okay? So in terms of chromosomes, sex is non-binary. Obviously, there's 7 categories. It can't be binary. Even if you did a sort of continuum thing and tried to do a cutoff in the middle, you couldn't necessarily dichotomize 7 categories. The second factor that composes the construct of sex is hormones. As we all know, our sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, other things like that, fluctuate throughout our lives, most notably at puberty and menopause. At menopause and during the menstrual cycle. Those are the ones that kind of get a lot of media and societal attention. However, our hormones also fluctuate from day to day and within a day. This can be affected by things like the food you eat. So you may have heard of phytoestrogens, which is a hormone that's similar to estrogen that's found in certain plants. There are drinking tap water. There's research that's birth control, the hormones from birth control, they're not killed or eliminated in our tap water filtration process. So they are still in the water that we drink, and therefore the food that we eat that's watered with that. The sun, for example, today's a cloudy day, we're going to be feeling more melatonin, which is going to affect our other hormones as well. How much you sleep, the weather, and a cavalcade of other things affect our hormones. Your body's sensitivity to the sex hormones in your body is also an individual trait that varies from time to time. So you can have high levels of testosterone in your blood while your cells are insensitive to it. Therefore, they don't respond to it. So in a blood test, it could show that you have high levels of testosterone, but then in your, for example, your primary or secondary sex characteristics, there's no necessary like masculization in that sense. So, and sex hormones don't just affect your sex characteristics. They also affect bone density, fat distribution, and immune health. As such, hormone levels and responsiveness to them are on a continuum. So again, in that factor model, we have a bunch of different hormones that compose the factor of hormones. And then within that, each of those items, there is a continuum, a sort of Likert scale from 1 to 10, if you would like. Next sex characteristic is genitals. So your genitals are the external visible parts of your pelvic region. There's so many slang terms and stuff like that, but I'm going to focus on research here. Your genitals are created by your body releasing and responding to sex hormones at a specific point in fetal development. So all humans start with internal gonads. Your gonads are what holds your reproductive cells. Okay. So all humans start with internal gonads. They're inside of your body. And if you receive and respond to high levels of androgens at an appropriate time, the fetal gonads descend and outside of the body. So as I mentioned, responsiveness to hormones is individual. But the timing, type, and amount of hormones is also individual. So genitals are often dichotomized, but in reality, they also exist on a continuum. So no two penises look alike. For example, And the classifications of genitals is based on whether they are closer to an ideal or archetype at one end of the spectrum, for example, a penis, compared to the ideal genital at the other end of the spectrum, a vulva. So usually this assessment is done through a diagnosis by a doctor while you're a fetus, through grainy ultrasound scans. I don't know, I think most people have seen these pictures of when someone is pregnant and they get the ultrasound scan, or as a newborn, usually fresh out of the womb. They'll look at your infant or unborn genitals and decide whether your genitals are more one or the other. So, like I said, penis, vagina, we all kind of start with the genitals that are more similar to vaginas, and then if you get and respond to androgens at the specific time, then your genitals will slowly kind of like more approximate towards the other. So within it, lots of variety. Every set of genitals looks different. Okay. So yes, so they look at your genitals, fresh baby genitals, and decide. Okay. This also involves assessing your gonads, aka your reproductive organs. So the medical professionals will look at things like the size of the phallus. So if the phallus is small, then they'll determine it as a clitoris and determine that you're female. If the phallus is large, they'll say it's a penis, and that they'll determine it as a male. They will also look at whether there is an opening or not and where that opening is. So if there's a large opening, they'll equate it with a vagina, which will equate with female. And whether the gonads are internal or external. So if your gonads are external, then they will be labeled as testes, and you will most likely get the diagnosis of male. And if you have no visible gonads, then there's the assumption of ovaries, that your gonads are inside of you and that you're female. Okay? And there's also look at other things like where urine is excreted, where your urethra is within that configuration. Okay. So genitals and gonads and your reproductive organs are parts of biological sex, but the diagnosis based on those are a gender characteristic. That is the legal sex and gender marker we carry on our IDs. It's part of our laws, your country's or your region's laws, not necessarily a direct result of biology. So when the doctor cannot decide whether the genitals presented are more towards one ideal or the other, the person is usually labeled intersex, or ambiguous genitalia, or disorders of sex differentiation is another term that's being used. And oftentimes, or at least in the past, there's a lot of pushback against it now, but a lot of the times if you are considered intersex, then they will mutilate or surgically operate on your genitals and your gonads in order to fit more one ideal or the other. So the genital surgery was historically done very shortly after birth, but the medical field now frowns upon that because misdiagnosis and misassessment has happened to the major detriment of patients. So now the APA recommendation is to correct issues that affect reproduction and or excrement release. So for example, if the urethra is closed and no urine can leave the body, they'll surgically correct that, but not to make aesthetic changes until the person can provide informed consent. There's not really a specific age for that informed consent, but that's the general guideline that's coming from the APA now. So intersex people, when accurately identified and the data is accurately collected, make up about 1.7% of the population. So that makes it about as common as having red hair. It's not as rare as people kind of make it out to be. Anyway, so in sum, both genitals and reproductive organs contain many characteristics and therefore are non-binary and exist on a continuum of size, openness, externality, etc. So they're also non-binary. However, the legal sex gender designation is binary. So take, again, in that factor model, all these different items, and then decide that this plus this plus this plus this equals. And so, the last biological sex category I'll cover in this video is secondary sex characteristics. So these are traits that develop late in childhood or early adulthood, what we often call puberty. So, and secondary sex characteristics is compared to primary sex characteristics or the sex characteristics that are present at your birth. Okay. So secondary sex characteristics include breasts, musculature, voice, hairline, hair, jawline, your Adam's apple. These characteristics, as I just said, with puberty and stuff, they fluctuate throughout your life. And that's due to a variety of factors. So, of course, pitch and tone of voice are on a continuum from high to low, right? Your voice ranges, and sometimes you'll wake up with your voice one way and go to sleep with your voice another way. Okay. Adam's apple and musculature is also on a range of size and consistency. Jawline ranges in roundness and sharpness, but also length, width, and depth. Hair varies in placement, location, thickness, and length. So head hair versus beard hair versus chest hair versus eyebrow hair versus leg hair all have very different connotations within sex characteristics. So again, these traits are on a non-binary continuum. They're on a spectrum. They range. So for example, and their direct link to gender isn't super clear. So for example, Toni Braxton doesn't suddenly become a male when she sings a deep tone, right? Nor does Barry Gibb become a female for attaining high octaves. Right? Your voice doesn't necessarily determine your gender, but it's one of the traits that people will use to assess your gender, which I'll talk about more in another video. Okay. Same thing, a female doesn't become male when she experiences menopause and develops facial hair, nor does a male become female because his fat deposits in a pectoral region. And the converse, Kate Moss isn't a man because she's flat-chested. That doesn't. Okay, so a lot of secondary sex characteristics, we like to believe that women are one way and men are this way, but when you actually look at it, there's so much variation. So, as I said, there's a range of factors that make up your biological sex. So that's it. That's pretty much it. That is the huge concept of biological sex summarized into 5 factors with many different items per factor. So within the approximately dozen plus things that make up biological sex, none of them are binary. And I haven't even touched on gender yet. That's the social construct of gender and how it affects people's perceptions and stuff like that. I'm just talking about pure physical biology. None of those aspects are binary. So the only binary aspect related to sociocultural, related to sex is a sociocultural construct made of the subjective diagnosis and subsequent assignment of a baby's genitals, which is actually part of gender, which is social, because your legal categories, legality laws aren't always based on science or research or biology or things that are concrete. They're social things. They're made to to describe and determine appropriate behavior, like all laws, don't steal, stuff like that. Okay. So it's a human judgment, it's not a biological thing. And that is it for sex. I will make a separate video on gender, again, making the distinction because of the research, and I will go and kind of like talk more about gender identity and stuff like that, but I want to make a separate video just on biological, physical sex traits. Okay? As I said, again, I'm Chase Sherry Lynn Birchwood. I am PhD candidate in psychology. I'm not representing any school, organization, or company. I'm speaking on my own behalf and summarizing research, which I will put in, I will make available below along with the transcript from this video. Okay, thank you, and I hope you have a great day.